Everyday Samurai, Episode 54. Greetings, friends, and welcome to Everyday Samurai, in service to your liberty and the security of a free state. Thank you for joining us once more for an exploration of mindset, martial arts, and the science of political economy, aimed at evolving consciousness and taking skillful action to promote personal mastery, human flourishing, and social harmony. We do this by being organized, armed, and disciplined to benefit ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities, while also recognizing that all our actions begin first in mind. So, disciplining our minds is the first priority, with organizing our thoughts and arming our cognitive processes with logic and reason as necessary adjuncts that lead us down the path of a self-actualized scholar-warrior. In this way, we invoke the samurai tradition of Bunbu Ryodo, the dual path of scholarly and martial arts. This is our contribution to humanity, to be mentally and physically prepared to uphold the enlightened principles that undergird and support a free society. In essence, we use the sword of science to cut down ignorance, dispel discursive emotions, and lead in the face of confusion. And we must admit that there are a great deal of conflicting narratives drowning out the basic tenets of civil discourse and political dialogue that aligns with constitutional order right now. If you're familiar with Sun Shi's Heiho, or what is known in the West as Sun Tzu's Art of War, then you'll know that all war is based on deception. So, it should come as no surprise that it takes a great deal of discernment to identify the real signals amid all the noise, especially in today's political climate. Everything you see unfolding needs to be treated with a high degree of skepticism, and that is exactly what a scientist does. Science proceeds through conjecture and refutation, constantly questioning assumptions, dispelling falsehoods, and rejecting what is not verifiable. This remains equally applicable in the social sciences, and more specifically in the field of political economy. Here, too, science must be used as the sword it was intended to be, quite literally, since the etymology of the word science derives from the ancient Latin root scindere, to cut, split, cleave, or divide. Science is about separating truth from falsehood, fact from fiction, and veracity from ignorance. And it takes courage to do so when many in the environment are indulging in emotionalism at best and downright propaganda, as is the norm. Science, too, must be practical, just as martial arts must avoid flights of fancy and ego aggrandizement. Science and martial art must provide tools we can use in the real world outside the laboratory or dojo. The science of political economy asks what institutional arrangements are most conducive to the production of wealth, defined as human well-being. Questions of wealth creation boil down to the skillful transformation of resources into satisfying goods and services. Similarly, martial art is concerned with prevailing in combat and, in order to do so, one must understand the nature of conflict. Here, too, we are informed by the science of political economy, which begins with the premise that resources immediately available are finite, while human desires are infinite. This is otherwise known as scarcity, and we can then see that all conflict is a contest for control of resources, down to and including the human body or behaviors. This is at the heart of all personal ego-driven conflicts as well. Competition to be the top dog in social settings is a demand for others to use their bodies in ways that gratify the dominant figure in the group rather than pursuing their own satisfaction. This is another reason to practice meditation, just as the samurai did in close affinity with the Zen and Mikkyo traditions. Not only does it make the warrior more alert and discerning, but more importantly, helps one keep their ego in check, which we all need to do, so as to avoid most pointless superiority contests. As Miyamoto Musashi said in his Book of Five Rings, never move but for advantage, and do nothing which is of no use. Yet on the macro scale, the average person is compelled to do and support things that are not only useless but also harmful. This is part of a divide and rule strategy on the part of the political caste, actively distracting the populace with frivolities and keeping them financially oppressed so as to maintain a separate elite status. It should come as no surprise to anyone who studies history through the lens of political economy. Political elites have used divide and rule mentally and financially to avoid rivals or the populace at large from challenging their position. A prime example of this is the Tokugawa shogunate of Japan's latter samurai period. They maintained control by forcing the daimyo warlords to spend extravagantly on alternate residences and public works projects, so that resources were less able to support armaments and fortifications in the local domains. Yet this centralized control and wealth-destroying formula ultimately weakened Japan as a whole with near monopoly status, leading to stagnation that left the country vulnerable to attack from more technologically advanced Western powers that thereby imposed unequal treaties on the impotent shogunate in the 1850s, and ultimately led to the abolishment of the samurai class. We can see the same elements present today in the form of taxation, regulation, arms controls, and increased centralization, including at the international scale. In order to impose these measures, however, elaborate ruses are employed to convince the unwitting populace that such actions are being done for their own good or are somehow necessary for the often abused common good. Yet this is why recognizing that all war is based on deception provides the scholar warrior with an advantage. We are already disposed to be not fooled by appearances, to recognize that whatever we are looking at is not the whole truth, and in most cases involves a constructed facade designed to shape the reactions of the untrained. However, we can use the sword of science to cut through ignorance and deception so as to get a clear understanding of cause and effect in operation with whatever matters are at hand. This is one of the real gifts of a scholar warrior, offering humanity, in addition to the physical skills of a trained protector, the capacity to dispel ignorance and deception by shining the light of a bright mind and sharp intellect acquired through discipline, study, and practice is needed now more than ever. I was recently invited onto the Patriot Angle podcast, which has subsequently changed its name to Savage Unfiltered with Michael Gardner, to discuss current events and the political climate using these tools. I trust that you'll benefit from the topics covered, and perhaps you can see some of the discernment of martial arts and analytical skills of political economy on display as we cut through the headlines. So, with no further delay, let's jump into the conversation on the Patriot Angle.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to tonight's show. Welcome. This is the Patriot Angle podcast, Unfiltered with Michael Gardner. Today, guys, we have a special guest joining us all the way from the country of Japan. On the show today is Ken, a former cop, soldier, and lifelong martial artist. Also, he is now a political economist, if I'm can't pronounce that word today. How you doing, Ken?
I am very well. Pleased to join you. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you joining us all the way from Japan. You want to tell us a little story, how you got to Japan?
Sure. It started probably when I was a young man, well, even an adolescent, 10 or 11 years old, got very interested in the ninja boom when Stephen K. Hayes started publishing his books, and program Shogun, that miniseries, was on TV. I watched that, really got fascinated. Lots of movies and things along those lines, messing around with my brother, practicing martial arts in the backyard. And I wound up joining the military and seeing the world a little bit, got into law enforcement when I was 24, started training in Aikido primarily, and it's been with me ever since. And I was also part-time with the military and started angling my career away from the combat arms, got into political military affairs, traveled the world, Africa, Europe, wound up in Japan finally, and then I retired here, and I love it. So that's how that's really the short course in how I wound up in Japan. I was able to get the military to pay for my move, and then just decided to stick around because I do indeed love it here.
Yeah. That's an interesting story. And, I mean, you're pretty much, it's the next day for you, it's Saturday morning there. And I'm told you live in Tokyo, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Tokyo. So it's, what is it, about like 8 o'clock in the morning there?
It's 9:05, yeah.
9:05 on a Saturday morning, folks. I mean, he's literally joining us from around the world, so to speak.
It's the future.
It's pretty much, right? We haven't even seen Saturday yet. It's still 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern here on the East Coast of United States here in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's pretty pretty fascinating. I haven't had anybody on the show literally joining the show, into the future, the next day, so to speak. So that's good stuff. Good stuff. And by the way, Ken, thank you for your service, by the way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And really, it's not so much about me. I came back with all my fingers and toes, thank goodness. But I've had some friends that did not make it back at all, and other people that came back completely maimed and permanently scarred and disfigured. So, since it was
Yeah.
Memorial Day just recently, and whew, it's a bit of an emotional roller coaster every year, because
And I'm sure you hold that day very, very close to your heart, Memorial Day, as other service members do.
yeah, especially getting to see things from the ugly side, the political side, and the band of brothers and the valiant warriors that went forward and did what their country asked them to do. And when you start to look at it from a larger perspective, you see the geopolitical machinations taking place. That's when my blood starts to really boil.
Right. And you mentioned a really good topic, which I've discussed on this show many times, the geopolitical angle of it, the agenda. What do you see going on right now, especially in the United States? I don't know if you get the same amount of media coverage there in Japan like we do here in the States. Do you see it, a little bit different now that you're out of the service compared to what's being shown now?
Well, I mean, I was very patriotic and was eager to join the military the day after I turned 17. So I was all in. And during the first Gulf War, 1991, I was chomping at the bit to get in there. And then when 9/11 happened, again, I was one of the first ones to volunteer to go over. And it took a little bit longer than I had anticipated. But I wound up doing 3 tours over there in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was all up in it. I wanted to be there. And then I started to see, well, things aren't really working as well as was promised. And, the systems and processes of the military bureaucracies were very bogged down and were very retarding to the war efforts. And I just said, something's not right. So one day while we were out on patrol, and I was working 6 days on, 1 day off, and doing route clearance patrol because I was an explosive ordnance disposal technician, bomb squad kind of guy. And flaming tanker had been hit by a roadside bomb that we were supposed to be protecting. It didn't happen on my watch. But this tanker was 7,000 liters of gasoline that the war effort was running up from Kuwait along this main supply route, Tampa. And got hit by a roadside bomb, and it was burning just out of this small hole in the side of the tanker itself. They didn't want to put it out because there's 7,000 liters of gasoline in there, so they just let it burn. And it burned for 5 days straight. So every day for the 6 days of my work week, I drove past it, watched it burn on the way down and then on the way back. And at the same time, if you'll recall, around 2007, the price of a barrel of oil shot up to $140. So I'm thinking, here we are, this 7-vehicle convoy. We're burning all this fuel to keep the supply routes open. This vehicle gets burned from a roadside bomb, and the price of oil. There's got to be a connection there. There's got to be a connection with all the fuel that we're burning doing these patrols, with all the fuel that they're sending up from Kuwait to supply the war effort, and then the fuel that's getting destroyed in the attacks, and then the price of oil on the world stage. So that's what really drew me out of my little localized, let me at 'em kind of scrappy-do mentality, and to start thinking about, okay, there's a connection here. What are those connections? And that's what led me to study economics. And eventually you start to realize there's a heck of a lot more going on in the world, and it is really driven by economics. So when you look at geopolitics, it's all about economics. It's all about control of resources. And I really, really want the Patriot community to really start looking at economics and studying the principles there. And then the real world starts to open up to you.
Ken, I agree with you on that. I think, we've seen a huge political shift in the last possibly 10 or maybe 15 years now, with all these different types of presidential administrations coming in. Now we have Biden in control, and previous to that was Trump and then Obama. There's such a huge difference between these three presidential administrations. Of course, and it goes all the way back to Bush even, and a lot of this, some people like to blame it on Bush, but I look at as, they're all the same pretty much, Ken. A politician is a politician. They can promise so many different things, for us Americans, and then of course the world too as well. But when it comes down to it, a lot of them, they don't deliver. You know what I mean? They don't deliver the results. And we've seen that firsthand. And our country is still the greatest country in the face of, on the world, right? I mean, so many different types of opportunities to fulfill here in the States. But, we're seeing this, especially the military. We've had a depleted military under Obama. Trump rebuilt it, and it seems like we're going back to the old Obama days under this administration. Do you care to, comment on that or?
Absolutely, because there's a continuity when you look at the foreign policy. It really hasn't changed all that much post 9/11. All the presidents thereafter, all the administrations seem to carry on the same basic contours of foreign policy. Even Obama came in and said that he was going to change the standing of the United States in the world, but he actually opened up new fronts in the war of terror. He continued on with all the same. He didn't end anything. He didn't close Guantanamo. He didn't do really much of anything that was very different from his predecessor. And for all of the great rhetoric that Trump came in with, not much changed in terms of what was going on internationally. He said things about ending NATO, but he kept it going. He decided to send a big bill to the Japanese for the US-Japan alliance, said they weren't paying their fair share, and that never got paid. So what we're seeing is great continuity, and I'm going to give you my formula up front. It starts with two basic postulates. One comes from Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and that is all war is based on deception. All war, not just some, but all war. And then the second one comes from von Clausewitz, the great Prussian theorist and strategist, and he wrote a book on war, and he said that war is just politics by other means. So if you take those two postulates together, all war is based on deception and war is politics by other means, you get to understand that war and politics are functional equivalents on the same spectrum, along a line of spectrum. And then you can you can conclude
right.
then
A lot of that, I'm sorry. A lot of that
you can conclude
I'm
then
sorry.
that all politics is based on deception. And that's another message that I would really like your audience to understand, is that when you look at politics, know that you're looking at war, and war is always based on deception. What is the objective of war? It's to force people to the will of the victor. And what does that mean? Force people to the will. It always comes down to resources, and it's the control of resources that matter. That's what I want people to take away from my experience.
Right. Right. A lot of that also piggybacks off of the old 1984 novel of George Orwell, which he had actually put in his book. So what you had just mentioned, kind of like I said, piggybacks off that book a lot. What George Orwell seen in 1984 up to the coming events that we're experiencing now in a modern world, right? We're seeing it happen pretty much every single day. We're seeing deception, we're seeing division, we're seeing chaos, we're seeing rhetoric, we're seeing all of it, Ken. And, to end all that, I believe we have to become more united. I know that sounds crazy in a lot of people's mindsets, but to become united in this world, that's when you truly end all of it. I mean, we have to come to reality. I don't think that will ever happen,
And
in our lifetime.
always bear in mind that the political caste have a design to keep people distracted and keep them confused. And also, this is a big one, keep them in fear, because when people are afraid, they will then look to those public officers, those government actors, those international organizations to restore order in some way. And of course, those people have an incentive. All people respond to incentives. That's one of the principles of economics. Those people in power that are going to shape that new order are going to create it in a way that benefits them at everyone else's expense, because they want the control of resources, and not the least of which is human resources. So when you talk about unity, that's absolutely true. But unity doesn't mean uniformity. So therefore, people need to recognize that the way to liberty, the way to restore what made America great, is not by everybody doing the same thing, but by making things as local as possible. Politics needs to stay local. And so avoiding all of these internationalist, globalist designs and the inroads that they're making through Agenda 2030 and environmental policy and all those things are all part of the Great Deception, and the Great Deception is designed to gain control of those resources. The solution
Oh,
is to
sure.
keep things local. So local
Sure.
self-governance was the objective of the revolution and the Constitution.
And, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, what you're hearing on the show today is definitely not only a former cop and a soldier to his label, but a true advocate to the service of liberty, which you, my friend, sir, you pretty much deserve that title. You do have a service to liberty, as what you're saying here on the show fits those words very, very accurately. Now, you use the actors, right? The government actors, and I like that term. I've never heard that term before, so it's a little new to me, but I like it. And we're seeing that right now under this administration, which, a lot of people will kind of chuckle probably after they hear me say this on the show. I see a lot of political cartoons, so to speak, coming out of this administration, especially the Biden administration. And the reason why I say that is it's a little different from the last three administrations with Trump, Obama, and Bush. We're seeing a lot of flip-flops scenarios under Biden. I'm not sure if you're following what I'm saying, but you can see what he says, and then he flip-flops back to what he originally said probably 20 or 30 years ago when he first got into politics. Are you seeing that under Biden, or are you just seeing something entirely different?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at his stance on gay marriage, you look at his stance on certain criminal activities, and you know that he is not a principled individual. Yet,
Well, he's a puppet. I mean, we see that. Yeah.
absolutely. And what we are seeing, it kind of goes back to that movie, The Matrix, where whenever you see a deja vu scenario or you see the cat was shimmering, I think it was in the first Matrix. It's glitches in the Matrix. This facade, this deception that they're putting forward, present to the people, has massive holes in it. And when you see those flip-flops, you recognize that this deception operation is faulty, that they don't have all their bases covered. And I want to go back to that idea of government actors, calling them government actors rather than the government. Remember what the Constitution says, and I want people to really get this and wake up to the idea that we, the people, are the government.
Right.
Not though, and so people talk about the Second Amendment. Oh, you're going to fight the government with your AR-15. No, I'm going to restore the government with my AR-15. Because
Right.
we, the people, are the government, not the politicians and the bureaucrats and the cronies.
Yeah, here's the thing, Ken. Like you mentioned, the original formula, the original agenda for the Constitution, right? The Bill of Rights, what our four founding fathers had set down in place. Now, folks, these were four men that literally signed their death warrants. They knew what they were getting into. They knew that this was going to be bloodshed upon bloodshed so many years ago when they signed this great document. The greatest document that was ever signed for the United States was the Constitutional Bill of Rights. Okay. When they signed this, Ken, they knew that they were facing extreme threats upon their lives. But they knew, Ken, this was the ultimate sacrifice that they had to do in order to store laws in this country. Fast forward, what is almost now 200 some odd years, that document is still in place. But what's really sad, Ken, is, you have a new type of society that doesn't honor the same principles that America once stood for. And I think a lot of it has to do with media, manipulating this generation, because when you don't know your history, it's very easily to manipulate a society that doesn't know it accurately. You know what I mean?
I do. And we have to go back to those founding principles. We remember that the Declaration of Independence was signed by people who pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor.
Right.
And I think that resonates well with somebody who studies samurai-related martial arts, or any martial arts for that matter. I think that the American character originally had a sense of honor as well. And that is slowly eroding, if there's anything left of it. I haven't been to the United States in quite a while, so.
Yeah, there's a lot of toxins in this country. I can tell you, you're not missing much.
No, and I'm fortunate that I get to curate the news that I watch or absorb and digest. So I get to see it, and I look at everything through the lens of political economy now. So I look at it as a scientist rather than just a consumer. And I'd really like people to start to wake up to that idea as well, is that you really need to stand guard at the doorway of your mind and be a Zen warrior who is filtering everything through that lens of principle. And to go back to that Constitution, remember, it was designed to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
Right.
So we, as inheritors of that great legacy, need to also preserve the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And that is the great challenge of our lives. You know, you brought up something about people that are disillusioned and don't see a lot of hope. Again, this is the challenge that we in this generation need to rise up to, so that they have a legacy to pass on.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's another topic here I wanted to get into with you, which I feel deserves a base here, a platform on the show.
Hey friends, let's take a time out to talk about something that's really important to me. You know, amid all the challenges life throws at you, it's important to develop coping strategies, and hopefully you have some healthy ones that can help you weather the storm of stressful conditions. As martial artists or first responders, namely people with law enforcement, military, or high-risk, high-stress experience, chances are you've incurred some damage, trauma, or injuries along your unique life journey. Perhaps those traumas are invisible, existing below the surface in the subconscious, yet continually affect you on a day-to-day basis, maybe even in subtle ways. Yet you know something's not right. It's time to be honest about it and call it what it is, dis-ease. And when left unchecked, that kind of dis-ease will manifest as additional trauma for yourself and those you care about. So, the time for healing is now. And fortunately, all natural relief is available. As someone who came from a hardcore law enforcement drug warrior background, I never thought I would be one to advocate for the use of cannabis oil, or CBD for short. Yet staying open to new information and new pathways of being, along with my quest for the principles of what makes for a better life for myself and society, from this perspective, after studying the dirty history behind the prohibition of hemp and cannabis and other life-enhancing products that derive from organic plants, I can tell you that it's a good thing CBD oil is now legal. With a bit of sarcasm, we should thank our political masters for allowing us the latitude to grow plants and use them for our own benefit, or to trade the fruits of our labor with others. Thank goodness for this newfound permission. After all, it's a restoration of the ability to possess and consume the very same plants that founding fathers like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson grew on their farms and have been part of Japanese culture since time immemorial. Nevertheless, CBD oil has been shown to provide tremendous relief in the form of anti-anxiety, anti-inflammation, and reduced pain associated with past injuries, traumas, surgeries, or arthritis, as well as a whole host of other assorted ailments. No wonder hemp is known as the wonder plant, and it's all natural and organic. It is also non-narcotic. It is not going to get you high, yet provides relief and an overall improved sense of well-being. And that's something that everyone can use a little bit more of these days, don't you think? That's why I recommend Cornbread Hemp. It's a company that was founded with the mission to make trustworthy, full-spectrum CBD products available to everyone. They produce top-shelf USDA-certified organic CBD oils using the flower-only part of the hemp plant, meaning no stalks, stems, or branches, just the best and most potent components, sourced exclusively from over 250 years of Kentucky cannabis tradition. We can be thankful that the Cornbread Mafia, a group of Vietnam War veterans who realized Kentucky was the best place in America to grow hemp due to it being on the same 37th parallel as the Hindu Kush from where hemp originated. They kept that great Kentucky tradition alive during the dark days of Prohibition. Cornbread Hemp recognizes the importance of cannabis medicine as a whole, not just CBD, and also advocates for access and reform while developing legal CBD products that highlight the full spectrum of hemp phytocannabinoids. Cornbread Hemp has a range of products including oils, gummies, creams, capsules, and even pet products to offer relief from pain and anxiety. Their distilled formula, for instance, includes an organic medium-chain coconut oil and full-spectrum flower-only hemp extract, and has a smooth, mild flavor with light notes of pepper and a touch of sweetness. Another great product is their CBD lotion, infused with menthol to absorb quickly, and no greasy residue. You just rub it on sore muscles and joints, any chronic problem spots. It reduces pain, swelling, inflammation, and is great for arthritis sufferers. If you're someone like me who did too many flying roundhouse kicks when they were younger and road marched entirely too many miles with an absurdly heavy rucksack on your back, or spent entirely too much time sitting, you know wear and tear takes a toll on you, leading to pain and suffering. Now is the time for healing. I believe so much in the benefits of CBD and specifically in Cornbread hemp that I invested in the company. Because of this trust relationship, you can enjoy a full 25% discount on your order by using the code EVERYDAY at checkout. Go to everydaysamurai.life/cornbread, and that's all one word, cornbread, and use the code EVERYDAY at checkout, again, all one word, to enjoy a 25% discount. That's everydaysamurai.life/cornbread. Okay, let's get back to the program.
All right, guys, back to the show here. Joining us today is Ken. He's a former cop and a former soldier, and he also has a desire, passion for the service of liberty. Welcome back to the show, Ken. Ken, we're talking about a lot of good stuff here on the show. We're talking about deception. We're talking about the true purpose of liberty here on the show, and what it means to people. I want to get into another topic with you because I have a huge passion not only for politics, but I have a huge opinion on what's going on with social media. I kind of basically got into a little bit of you before the show started with social media and censorship and the attack on free speech. We're seeing it very heavily being played out here in the United States. I'm not sure if it is being played out heavily there in the country of Japan, but I could tell you right now, Ken, free speech is pretty much under attack here in the United States. Are you seeing that in Japan, or is it seems to be just an issue here in the United States?
I think the United States enjoys a certain privilege that is not available anywhere else in the world, which makes it so precious. Anywhere else in the world is already captured. Most of the media in other countries is tax funded and regulated, just like the BBC. People have to pay a tax. Here in Japan, NHK is also paid for directly through taxation. Whereas in the United States, the public broadcasting system, yes, it's tax subsidized, and so it's basically a propaganda outlet, no different than the Pravda of the Soviet Union. I mean, it's more blatant. The United States is unique in that sense. In Germany, there are certain people that can go to jail for the things that they say. So free speech is not enshrined in any governmental contract anywhere else in the world. And we're starting to see it slip away in the United States. That's dangerous.
Right. I mean, you mentioned Germany. I mean, their political backyard has been the same, since the early 1900s and even before then,
That's right. They're still living in Bismarck's Germany. It's no different from 1872.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this goes even further back before the Hitler era. I mean, this is. I mean, they've been pretty much practicing that same political specter, so to speak, for the last 200 years, if that, maybe more.
Well, I would again, as I said, it's 1872 in Germany. It's still Bismarck's Germany. And what did Bismarck do? He said that he wanted to defeat the communist wave by adopting socialist policies. So, it was all about concentrating power, and he said that he was going to prevent the rise of communism by adopting socialist policies. Well, what does that sound like? It's exactly like FDR. It's the same thing with the Cold War. We wanted to defeat the Soviet Union, therefore we needed to create this massive military-industrial complex and control industry so that we can have this Cold War.
Oh, and sure.
This is what I mean by you see a continuity in policies that has been taking place all over the world, a little bit slower, but still has the same basic contours in the United States. So what we're seeing is creeping socialism infecting the United States as well. And of course, in order to enact socialist policies, you need to have a massive, massive propaganda campaign to get the people to accept it. So you have to have both the carrot and stick. And that's exactly what is being witnessed in the United States. You're suppressing dissident voices, whether it be through social media, whether it be through cutting them off from the banking system, Operation Choke Point, an Obama era legacy, but we're seeing it today. And you saw that with the Canadian truckers, where people that wanted to support that protest movement saw their funds seized. So control of the resources. Always think about this is what the real war is about, control of resources.
Oh, yeah.
And controlling the means. So it always comes down to private property, because The freedom of speech is meaningless if you don't have an outlet like what we're on right now. And that's why the freedom of the press was enshrined in the Bill of Rights. It's so important to be able to speak, but you also need the means, the physical means of getting your word out. So if it's a printing press, if it's a website, if it's a podcast, if it's YouTube or what have you, whatever those outlets are, those need to be held in private hands and kept free from political interference.
Yeah.
That's the only way out of this creeping socialism problem.
I think that was the problem there when social media first took its platform, right? In the early 2000s. I was basically in college then. And I remember when social media first got its first launch, of course, before Facebook and Twitter and Instagram ever came into existence. We had the original formula of it through a platform which I don't even think exists anymore. It was called MySpace. I always looked as MySpace as the original Facebook, right? I can remember this, Ken, as it was yesterday. We never had a problem with the original social media. There was no censorship. There was no fact checking. There was none of that garbage that you see today. I think the problem that you mentioned, and you brought up a good point, when social media introduced its way to politics, that's when it became a problem. When government had put its hands on it, its footprint, right? That's when it became a problem. Now it's looked as a subsidy. And this is my opinion now, guys, and you can agree with me or not, but I look at social media as now a subsidy of a government agency. You know what I mean? I mean, you see it through we just were told, the person or the people that had a huge influence on fact checking with this whole Ministry of Truth, which we seen a little glimpse of it, in the 80s and everything before social media and the internet ever came into existence. Do you see some type of government, agency under social media, or do you think it's an entirely different entity?
See, this is where I'm going to put my criminal investigator hat back on and tell people to follow the money. If you actually trace the funding for where Facebook and a lot of other Silicon Valley enterprises comes from, you can trace that back to government funding. And the Stanford Research Laboratory, as well as In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's venture capital firm that spreads money around these different budding industries and technologies to get a result. And Facebook derives a lot of their funding and maybe even some technological support through those types of outlets. So you're seeing that there was a government hand from inception in a lot of these social media giants. What happens is they keep it free. They allow people to think that they're getting a platform, and that attracts them to bootstrap the platform and get people interested in it. And then they start to slowly restrict access and to shape the message and to change the algorithms to support the policy that they want to institute. So it's a little bit insidious from its inception. And again, I tell everybody to follow the money, do your own research. And you brought up these so-called fact checkers. If you actually look at the money behind those organizations, you'll see that they are nothing but front groups for the same people that are trying to shape the policy. So a lot of, and there's a famous one, the Pointer organization, the Pointer Group or Pointer Institute, supposed to be all about good journalism. And they're one of the big proponents of this fact check movement. Well, that's just astroturf for the political elite. You'll see that they get money from the Gates Foundation, and basically it's a cutout.
Oh,
through Zuckerberg.
It's all funded through Gates and Soros and everything else. Yeah, which they have a huge influence over. But we're on this the social media topic here. Just recently, which you're pretty much well aware of, Elon Musk just bought Twitter. We heard that for months upon months prior to his purchase, that he had a high interest in purchasing Twitter. When he's shown that interest of purchasing Twitter, a lot of liberals here in the United States were in fear of him doing this. Well, why were they in fear? Well, he can loosen up the restrictions, meaning fact checking and censorship and shadow banning and all these type of big tech terminologies, right? He could still do that. We haven't seen it done yet, or we've seen a little bit of the restrictions come off with Twitter. A little bit. Do you think he's going to go to that avenue? And if he does go that avenue, Ken, do you think this is going to be a big step for social media? I don't know if you're on True Social, Donald Trump's platform. What I'm told is doing phenomenal, not only here in the United States, but now across the world. It's becoming available in other countries. Do you think that Elon Musk's Twitter will join the same avenue and the same roots as True Social and now Rumble?
I think it's way too early to tell. Just like the deal itself, I understand that the deal hasn't gone through and there's a couple of hiccups as far as what's going on with the due diligence that precedes the actual sale. The fact that he made an offer and the board
Right.
accepted it, well, now they need to actually open up the books. And that even is enough to trigger the left. And again, that goes back to what we talked about earlier. They need to control the narrative because massive propaganda is a prerequisite to instituting these socialist policies. And you made mention of the book
Oh, sure.
1984, which is great. I think there's a scene in there where he has to be convinced or he has to admit that 2 and 2 does not equal 4. It equals 5 or some other number. And the same thing is going on right now where
Yeah.
the left wants to convince people that there are not two genders. And in order to do that, there needs to be a massive campaign. It uses both a carrot and a stick. They sanction people and they just suppress any dissident voices that do not support this leftist propaganda. It is yet to be seen whether or not Twitter actually changes things materially. We've seen some minor changes, but that might be just like what a boa constrictor does, right? It allows you to take a breath, and
Right.
then every time you exhale, it tightens. So I don't know. But it just the
Well,
rhetoric enough
yeah,
was was sufficient to scare the left. Just like Donald Trump, he really didn't do much materially, but his rhetoric was enough to trigger the left into a frenzy, and that's what we're seeing right now.
yeah, he didn't do much. I agree with that. He didn't do much, but I mean, yes, he was only a one-term president, and God willing, if he does run in 2024, which I don't know if he is or not, but he only had 4 years. I think, to be honest with you, he did a lot in 4 years. The only suit that I think he did best was his foreign policy. He had a very, very strong foreign policy. A lot of world leaders got along with Trump. I mean, Christ, we've seen the dictator of North Korea. I mean, literally walking side by side. I mean, you don't see that with many leaders here in the United States, even senators and congressmen and women. I
No,
mean,
that's right. And leadership matters. Definitely. It
yeah.
sets the tone.
I mean, he even had respect from President Xi of China. I mean, that says a lot, for a businessman turned politician. And, I think, we talk about Donald Trump as we close it out here and then Elon Musk. I mean, maybe that's what we need for this country, Ken, is a businessman that knows what's best for America and not a politician that's just going to, say the same broken promises that they've been saying for the last 20, 40 years.
Yeah, I agree that there needs to be a change in leadership because, as I said earlier, leadership does matter. It sets the tone. The unfortunate thing about all of that is the bureaucracy is overwhelming. You look what happened with Ukraine when Trump even hinted at not giving Ukraine weaponry. Somebody within the Pentagon, this Vinkman, lieutenant colonel type, decided that he was going to carry on with the program exactly how he had envisioned it, regardless of what the president's orders were.
Yeah.
And that's just a metaphor of what the bureaucracy did. They call it the deep state, and people want to debate the fact of whether or not it exists. I think it's
it's very much alive.
Absolutely undeniable.
It's very much
more,
alive, yes.
The more bureaucracy that exists is the deeper the state becomes. There's no denying it. And I was part of it for a long time. So
I think we're living under a shadow government right now, especially with this administration. A lot of people think that Big Brother, a lot of people like to look at it as Big Brother as Joe Biden, but I really think that Big Brother is not Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden is basically the puppet, and the person that's pulling the strings is somebody else. Because, if you did pay attention earlier in this podcast episode, folks, I plugged in a video with reporters questioning Joe Biden about a statement, and he's totally flip-flopping the entire statement. Like Joe is, he's not there. I mean, I've said it many times on the show. The elevator doesn't go to the top floor with this president. They're talking about something else, and then he's going into like, good luck with Elon Musk if he lands on the moon. Like, Joe, we're talking about something else. So I think you talk about the deep state, which I think is very much alive here in this country. There is a shadow government. I don't think Joe is running the show there at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. A lot of people are either thinking it is either Obama, maybe possibly having a third term under a disguise of some type of old constitutional amendment that may have never been passed, or it has been passed and we just don't know about it, or possibly Nancy Pelosi. There's been a lot of rumors of that, so I don't know.
I think all those people are simply figureheads, and that the real policies are set in rooms far different from the places where they stand. And that's why we see, again, looking at foreign policy, there was continuity of policy from 9/11 till today, and no president really did much to change it materially.
No.
And I think that this Biden administration, like you said, is certainly not running the show. It's certainly not Joe Biden himself. He can't think.
No.
He's just carrying on talking points. But that's how all government offices work. I mean,
sure.
When I was in combatant commands, you have 4-star generals that get hit with some news thing, and he turns to his staff and says, "What are we doing about this?" And then the low-level staffers write the talking points, and the high-level staffers come up with the policy positions, and the generals are just figureheads.
Yeah.
And that's within the military, let alone the entire United States federal system.
Well, we've seen Trump just comment just recently, with 4-star generals, that with the whole Afghanistan pullout just recently last year. I mean, he said you have 4-star generals now, more like wusses. I mean, you have these generals that don't even know what the hell they're doing. Advisors under Biden. Like, who the hell pulls out military command units first, but leaves all the weapons last? I mean,
that's 100% right. I used to work with an old grizzly cop who was a Korean War veteran, and he said that he went over there as a Marine and said, "This is no way to win a war," and wound up leaving the Marines after his tour, and then he wound up becoming a cop, etc. I said the same thing to myself in Iraq, and then even more so in Afghanistan. I was like, there's no way that winning this war can be the focus or the objective of the policies that we're seeing play out, because it's just absurd. And the bureaucracy is just incompetent. And it doesn't matter. You want to love the country. That doesn't mean you need to love the incompetent bureaucracies. The same army that killed Pat Tillman is the one that you're waving your flag for. It's not the army that is the backbone of the United States. It's the liberty of the American people. And that's what needs to come to the fore.
I mean, what he did, Ken, was like, I mean, you even had far leftists of this country scratching their heads like, come on, Joe. Like, do you realize what the hell you just did? You just literally built an army of modern weaponry for the Taliban. And then now you have literally terrorist units running that country. I never thought in my wildest dreams I would see that. It's not a dream. Actually, it's a nightmare to have a terrorist group run a country like that and then gift it. We literally gave him a Christmas gift of weapons and modern military equipment that was purchased through when President Donald Trump was in office. Equipment that, now the enemy knows everything about.
Well, take it another step further. During the Obama administration, that dust up in Syria was at its height, and there was a time when the Department of Defense and the U.S. military was funding one group of rebels, and the CIA was funding and arming a competing faction. And that was more aligned with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Again, this is the message that I want everyone to take away, is that when you say, quote unquote, the U.S. government, you're not talking about one thing. You're talking about factions. You're talking about competing bureaucracies. You're talking about parochialism. And everybody wants their share of the pie. So don't give them the credit of calling them the government. Call it the Army. Call it the Department of Defense.
Well, Ken, this is not the same government that when it was first started out. I mean, we aren't. This isn't a government. Well, it is a government, but it acts as more of a corporation. When they say the United States is a country, it acts more of like a corporation than anything, because if you look at it like that, it's true. The government is funded by the people. If the people don't work, they don't get funded. That's a corporation.
And that's a good way to look at it, but it's a better way to just call it a mafia.
Well, that too.
And when you say a mafia, you're talking about not just one family. You're talking about competing families.
Yeah.
They might all be extortionists and racketeers, and that's the same for the political caste as well. I'm talking about the politicians, the bureaucrats, and the cronies. Anybody who derives their living through taxation is part of this machine.
Yeah.
It's a looting machine. It's best to call it a kleptocracy.
Yeah.
And you can love your country, recognize also that there is always a criminal element. And so there needs to be new safeguards for our liberty. And fortunately, they are already written into the Constitution.
Wow.
The only problem is there's a massive, massive waking up that needs to happen because the propaganda is thick. And again, all war is based on deception.
Well, Ken, as I close it out, we need to wake up. You know, we don't need to be woke, because that's what's going on in the country right now. Everything is woke, which I hate that word, woke. It's like, what?
Yeah, and you got the generals in the military that are more focused on advancing all these woke agenda items, LGBTQ issues and women, peace, and security. All of that has nothing to do with the defense of the United States.
I just labeled this on my show last night. I did a piece on how the Marine Corps now is honoring the Pride Month here in America, which I call the Alphabet Month, right? Because it's the LGBTQ plus, right? Sorry if I'm offending anybody. Well, actually, I'm not. If you're offended, oh well. I don't live by the new principles, Ken. I'm old school. I mean, my grandparents, if they were still alive, they would be ashamed of what's going on today in America.
Yeah, I'm kind of laughing because the B in that LGBTQ plus formula, the B means binary, right? Bisexual.
Yeah.
So that kind of admits that there's only two genders.
Yeah.
So that you see the incoherence that they're okay to sit in
Yeah.
when they advance these ideas. But that's what the generals care about more of.
Yeah, I just got yelled at the other day by a transgender person the other day saying, you need to accept me. And I looked at them and I said, you want me to accept you, but you can't even accept yourself for what you really are. Okay, good luck with that.
Yeah, and when I was a cop, I dealt with a number of those people. And again, I accept them. That doesn't mean I have to countenance bad behavior. That doesn't mean I need to accept you in my restaurant or my facility. You know, that's what private property means, the right to include or exclude. So I accept you, but that doesn't mean you have the right to access my things, my property, my spaces.
I tell you, you know, Lady Liberty right now is in tears, you know, over there at the Hudson River there in New York and New Jersey. She's in tears right now because I'm sure she sees what's going on in this country. Ken, we have a broken society as well as a broken nation, and it's going to take a lot to fix this country, a lot.
Yeah, and again, you need to build the mental, spiritual, emotional fortitude, and then I suggest you do that by way of training in a martial art, because it is everyone's duty, every able-bodied citizen's duty to be organized, armed, and disciplined to execute the laws, repel invasions, and suppress insurrections without reliance upon the political caste. That's the only way to take back this country. Personal fortitude, and then contribute it to the maintenance of a free society.
Yeah, absolutely. But sadly, we may not see that in our lifetimes. It's going to happen. But like I said, sadly, I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetimes.
It's going to take a lot more suffering, unfortunately, to wake people up. But you could see that in your own life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Ken, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I want to thank you for giving your insights, your story. I also want to thank you again for your service and your sacrifice to this great country. We are still a great country. You know, we are, you know, we need to go into a healing process. But I want to thank you for coming on this show. I want to thank you for taking your time out of your busy day. And please always continue the great fight, sir.
Thank you. And you too. I appreciate your efforts with this podcast and helping to wake people up.
Thank you very much, sir.
Friends, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Everyday Samurai and look forward to seeing you next time. If you like what you've heard here, be sure to offer up a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or the service of your choosing. Remember to subscribe, like, and share the show with someone you think would resonate with our message of advancing a more secure, harmonious, and prosperous society under the protection of enlightened warriors. With all we do, we are building a community of warrior protectors through the disciplines of mindset, martial arts, and the science of cultivating wealth. If that sounds like you or someone you know, then welcome to this way of life. So check in frequently with us at everydaysamurai.life and sign up for the newsletter while you're there. Till next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and be well.